The stench of sexual abuse, rape, misconduct, and molestation to women has been something that has been recently in the news, but it's been something that's been going on for decades and generations. And to that end, when we make distinctions, we make no hierarchy. In my discussions, in our discussions, I'd like to center the victims of sexual abuse, misconduct, rape, and molestation, as opposed to centering the predators. I would like to center us. Those of us have been through it, witnessed it, been part of a world that ignores that. In this discussion, we will talk about everything, but we're going to center it around Black gay men and boys, not because we're more important, but because we have a distinction that needs to be spoken to. And in that distinction, we want to talk, of course, there have been recent articles that have hit the newspaper, but before those recent articles, this has been something that has been an open secret, as I'm assured that all people who have gone through this have had it be an open secret, whether you're in a workplace, a corporate environment, a dance studio, but we're going to talk about the arts and the different places and pillars of the arts that create a specific and distinct environment for sexual abuse and predatory nature. In my life, I was a dancer at a very young age. I knew personally that I was gay at a very young age. Knowing those two things and coming from the community in which I came, I had to climb over certain hurdles as a young Black gay man to young Black gay boy to become a dancer. I was talented at age 5, and people started calling me sissy and things of that nature around 9 or 10, as early as I can remember, before I even had an understanding of myself sexually or even outside of my gender identification as a boy. Going through all of that, at 14, I decided I wanted to be a dancer. I was always the one at the party dancing, always the one that I still am. But that
changed.
Space to be a dancer, and I wanted to train professionally. And after climbing over hurdles, fighting in schoolyards, overcoming people, adults included, saying you shouldn't dance and boys shouldn't dance, and it's going to turn him into a sissy. He's already one. He's gay. Climbing over all that, I found an environment where I could dance. I trained at Dance Theater Parliament in Alvin Ailey. These are huge institutions inside of dance and the arts and subsequently the world. The influence and impact that those companies have had on the world, not just racially, but in terms of changing the tapestry of dance, it has been pivotal. To find yourself in those environments and in other environments, all of the dance environments, and then to find a culture that is still dismissive of you as a gay person. To understand that there is patriarchy and homophobia even within the specter of dance, even within the specter of Black dance. Understanding that those things are created by the larger specter of white supremacy and patriarchy, which is what we all run into. So when you have a Black institution that starts from scratch, the burden of proof, the burden of respectability, the burden of worth is all over that institution. So understandably, those institutions took their public persona and look very seriously. To that end, the maleness of it all was very important. I remember hearing Dance Like a Man from age, as soon as I started dancing, day one, a man was part of it, which immediately told me that who I was, because remember, outside of the studio, I was already being called names that were not invited to the totality of who I was. So once you get into a studio and somebody's also saying Dance Like a Man there, you're like, oh, this is not a safe space either.
Right.
In that space, there were many gay men that were wonderful there teaching and growing us. But many of the gay men I grew up around were not acknowledged as such. It was a culture of silence around the identity of the men that we are around. So if you put that together, you have being an artist, which is one climb. You have an institution that has made it somewhere that has had another climb that is very difficult to make it to where these institutions, not just singling out Alvin Ailey and Dance Theater Parliament, there are multiple other institutions around the country and around the world that work very hard to educate Black children through dance and to be a part of the community. So that specter of white supremacy, which means I have the burden of proof of my existence, is all over these institutions, and they're working hard to maintain that. And then you have people that are in charge of it in different places who are full human beings who are not encouraged to show up as they are. As a young person, I never saw men say, this is my partner, I'm gay. That was not part of it, even though it was obvious that everybody was gay in the circumstance, that the majority, I should say, of the men involved in this were gay men, or somewhere on the LGBTQIA spectrum. I think that group of things creates a perfect culture for shame, fear, and a lack of liberation, which is a breeding ground for predatory behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
No means would I say the majority of men or women or people or adults in those circumstances that I worked in were predatory. However, the predatory nature of one is all it takes to damage many. And in that circumstance, I find myself in positions that I would not have wanted to be in, because I was trying to be somewhere and I wanted so badly to be liked. And those circumstances created places where I won't detail my victimization, because today I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the people that are speaking out now and about changing the culture overall.
Mm-hmm.
So in that aspect, I would only say that being in those circumstances and not feeling fully liberated, and then watching people in front of me also not fully liberated, created a culture of silence. And silence breeds dysfunction. It breeds predatory behavior. It breeds shame. So in going forward in 2020, where I am today, and I find myself to be an artistic leader in many spaces, I've made it my business to make the spaces that I dwell in to be sexually exploitative free. I make sure that I show up fully as I am as a Black gay man, because that's my identification, and make spaces to find their identification as they wish, with no pressure on disclosure of who and what they are, but letting them know that in spaces where I am and I am in charge, that all of the people and who they are and their full identities are allowed. I find that approach allows people the space to be free. That freedom makes predatory behavior, it's an unfriendly environment, if you will, to the growth of predatory behavior. And I've made that a point of my constant and consistent artistic leadership. I've made a point to be an advocate for women in spaces that I am, because misogyny and patriarchy are a large part of dance as well. Women are often victimized throughout dance, as we talked about before. And I make sure that in my spaces, those are things that I address head on and allow people to show up as they are, so the germination of those kinds of things does not grow within my spaces. However, those are not the spaces that I came up in, and that is not, I don't believe, the purview of the institutions that I was in. I don't even know that the institutions that I was in understood the larger ramifications of this conversation. I think we all can admit that the evolution of women, men, gender identity, understanding those circumstances has changed the landscape in which we dance and in which we do art. And I think those things have changed. So mine is not to villainize anyone except for the people that have been predators. The institutions have done the best they could. And I think at this point, it's time to do better and to do more. Jamal?
One of the things that we talked about before is the experiences. What are our experiences with all of this? And as someone from Los Angeles who grew up in the sort of the vast world of kind of the commercialized entertainment aspect of being a dancer versus just the concert dance, which is of course where I spent the majority of my time training. One of the things that was clear to me right away is the commoditization of my body as a sexual thing. Do you know what I mean? As I knew right away that that was going to be part of the equation. I understood that for better or for worse, hopefully for better, but easily for worse, that I was going to be constantly looked at in a way that was about objectification, about sexuality, about all of those things. And so I knew that I would be predisposed to bad business practices, to, people who were predators, to people who were ready to have sex with me before I was actually 18. That happened a lot. I'm certainly not suggesting that it was okay. Of course it's not okay. That's why we're here right now. But it wasn't clear to me at that age how devastating, how impactful, and how long-lasting the effects of predation could be in that way. I can say that to my knowledge, I have never dealt with quid pro quo sexual harassment, which the definition is basically someone in a position of power leveraging that power, holding in their hand sex or holding their hand sex for me to give, and then the other something that they're going to give back, a part, a job, a promotion, a role, things like that. Basic sexual harassment. I can't say that I have experienced that directly, but what I have experienced is people who are older and more respected in the dance community, people whose opinions have weight in the course or trajectory of my career. Ultimately, I have been in positions where those people have put me in compromising spaces. For some reason, for a number of reasons, I always felt that I had agency in those situations, but the discomfort I felt the next day, the sense of shame, I remember having that moment with such a person who was actually in the same generation as our parents, and he was well respected, and I thought, oh, this is just going to be, I'm just going to his house so that we can discuss whatever we're going to discuss that has to do with dancing in my career and how much insight he had into where it could go, what my career could do, the talent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that transitioned into a sexual moment. I was 17, I might've been 16. And as uncomfortable as I felt in the beginning, I realized that my comfort was about the guilt of, ooh, we're not supposed to be doing this. But it wasn't anchored in, you're not supposed to be doing this. I didn't get there until later, and I had to unpack it. And fortunately, the way that it rolled out for me is that as I grew up in dance, I realized that I didn't want to become that person. I didn't want to become the person who was introducing some level of inappropriate to my discourse or my mentorship of another male dancer. So I have made it a point to go the other direction. And now we're seeing that there are a whole lot of people who did not do that, who did not go the other direction, who doubled down on the levels of inappropriate and the sort of leveraging of stuff for sex. So my experience, my us too, I can honestly say that I know of, again, because I don't know about some of the jobs that I've gotten, if that played a part, if sort of the expectation or hope that something sexual might happen was there, even if it wasn't made clear to me, because that's a thing too that happens in this industry. But I know that in that moment, the issue was, here was an older person that I respected who was interested in something other than my talent and was willing to act on that. And I was fortunate enough to be able to put that somewhere in my sort of Vulcan way of dealing with things so that it didn't destroy me, and then turn that into something positive in terms of my version of mentorship with others. But it is definitely in us too. There's no way around the fact that what he did was absolutely inappropriate in every way. And it exploited the power dynamic or the difference in age and experience, and also impact and influence. That's that story. That's the basic part of it. It didn't get further than probably fellatio and some other things that probably shouldn't have happened, but it still involved all of that. And there was still shame and a little guilt and all of those things the next day, for sure.
I think, before we go to you, Darell, I think what's important to note is that even as you speak about it now, Jamal, you say, it didn't get it further than fellatio. You say that so eloquently and with such detachment from it. I think one of the things that's very poignant, in my circumstance, it was somebody that was a friend in the community that was older than me. It was at the point in my life where I was going out. I was already sexual. I was about 19 years old. And hanging out with the older folks, and we're getting ready to go out, and they pushed me down in the bedroom and ejaculated on the back of my shirt. And in that moment, you feel complicit, right? Because part of the feeling of complicity is that every day as he would come on my body, he would talk about the way my body looked. That was a constant, pervasive conversation that people do to groom you, and when you're coming in an environment, especially as gay men, and especially of that generation. I'm so happy for the generation now that they get to see different images of themselves and get to understand themselves. So luckily, I was very loved by my parents, but their struggle with sexuality created a degree of shame inside of me, where as I pursued to learn myself as a young gay man, I was precluded from having a puberty. So understanding yourself, because for all those who are watching, when you're a gay man, especially if you're talking about the 90s or 80s, your puberty is meant hiding for the most part.
Right.
Or to exist. You're not allowed to go on first dates at 14 and like somebody your own age, or any of those things that we think of as a normative, normal rite of passage for any adolescent. As a young gay man, you don't get that.
No.
It's in shame, hiding, trying to get rid of it if you're scared of it. If you're not scared of it, trying to find places that are clandestine in order to express that. So that's a perfect person to be sought after by an older person who wants to prey on you, because you do not feel. And then once you become sexual, you're in that gray area. I was not a virgin.
Yeah.
In the area where I'm over 18, so I can choose to have sex, right?
Yeah.
I'm old enough that there is sexuality about me, but there's a misconduct going on because I'm being forced and preyed upon. And then once it happens, because you're an already sexual person, because you already feel shame about your sexuality, you do not tell.
Right. You also, you start that thing that actually takes you through past your gay puberty and into your gay adulthood. That becomes all a part of the silence, of the holding on, of the keeping it quiet, of the, this is something I can't talk about, even if it's in the back and the front. It's still there. And to your point about puberty, we talk about that too, that you don't get a gay puberty. So it also confuses you about the sense of agency that you have. Because again, like you said, what if you've had sex already? What if you have done it and you've made decisions about it and all that stuff? You feel that you have a certain level of agency because there's no one walking you through what those things are, and no one's discussing things like levels of consent, because all of your attraction to males, or your same gender loving self, all of that is wrapped up in shame. So you don't get that moment of understanding, oh, here, let me pull you aside and let you know, here are all of the things you know. Age of consent would be a great place to start that conversation if you had, sort of light on you.
Or the degree, and I'll take it to Darell right after this, but the degree of self-love, right? Yeah. So even though we felt loved, and I think the three of us, I know all three of us, but I think I can speak to all three of us, we all felt loved by our parents, regardless or in spite of. But when you love in spite of, right? And there's a struggle with, you are trying to save your parents from the pain of your sexuality. So you are not telling your mother, oh, I think somebody's attractive, or this older man is attractive to me, and I like
reinforcing it, right? They're reinforcing it. They don't even realize they're reinforcing it, but they're reinforcing everything that you're talking about, that you're getting from society, and then also in your dance studio, Dance Like a Man. You're getting all of it.
So when you go back, so you don't think, for those that are watching, at the point where these things happen, there is never a thought in your mind, go to the police, go to an elder in the studio. You're feeling like, if I go to the studio, even if nobody's ever said this, you're feeling, if I go to my studio director and say, this person here did this to me, you're not feeling like you believe, and they will just start talking about your sexuality and your shape. Indeed, I've worked in parts of this country where I was working in the middle of the country, and there was a twirlers group that was in the town that I was working in. And it was known, or once again, an open rumor, that the man was about a 40-year-old man, had all these young boys that he was molesting and raping. And as we were having this discussion in my institution that was very much speaking against that, one of the teachers in the building that lives in that city said to me, well, all those boys are gay, they probably want it. And that was the attitude going on there. So Darell, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience, not in a dance community, but in church, because you grew up in the church, and moving into the arts community.
Okay. I've always known that I was different. Or not normal, or as it was often hurled at my mother, is that boy all right? So growing up, 5, 6, 7 years old, I always knew that I looked at men and women differently. I looked at men differently than my brother did. I looked at women differently than my brother and the other boys in my neighborhood. The thing that was so specific to me was a part of my socialization of the heteronormative was the heaping on of religion. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just what my mother thought. It wasn't what my auntie thought. It wasn't what the kids at the bus stop or at PE thought. It was what God, who made heaven and earth, who said, let there be light. It's what God said about who I was. And so growing up, as you said, everything was in hiding. I remember there were things that I wanted to express about myself that I only did in my room when no one else was home. When I wanted to sing certain songs, I remember closing the door and putting a towel underneath the door to make sure that no one could really clearly hear that I was singing So Emotional by Whitney Houston. So for me, there has always been an element of I have to hide, I have to cower up until a certain age because I'm free now. But there was always the energy that I cannot be myself. And so when you come into your sexuality, I love how Bishop Yvette Flunder, when she talks, she spoke one time and she said, those of us who came into puberty and sex, we came in on a crapshoot.
Who said that?
Bishop Yvette Flunder. She's been a pastor for years, an activist for years. She is very open about her life. She is the lady who leads the song, Thank You, Lord, that Walter Hawkins wrote. It's on the Love Alive 4 album. Her wife, Shirley Miller, is the lead vocalist on the iconic gospel song, Oh Happy Day. And they've been together for longer than I've been, almost as long as I've been alive.
That's
so,
a very
yes, I'm 40, dog. So, so in growing up, a lot of people don't understand what charismatic or dogmatic denominations are like. Many of my friends grew up and they went to church on Sunday. If there was a special program, they had a rehearsal on a Saturday. If it was the holiday and there was a pageant or a concert or something, that was a Friday night. But I never had, from about 10 years old up until I was 25, if I had a break from the church, it's because I snuck off and then I felt guilty about that. So for me, the indoctrination was almost every single day. Tuesday, in my teen into my young adult years, Tuesday night was Bible study. Then Wednesday was the prayer meeting. Then Thursday night was adult choir rehearsal. Friday night was some type of church service at my church, or we went somewhere to find us a service. Saturday was some type of rehearsal or some type of event raising funds for the church. And then Sunday, being Pentecostal, it was normally all day long. And Monday, if you didn't have service or anything to do, you were still around church people. So you were still around that doctrine. You were still around that ideology. I started to notice when I became of age, because the first person that I was sexual with, I was 16, he was 26, he was not in the church or in my denomination. And I was able to separate that because that was me dabbling out in the world. And that's how I compartmentalized it. And growing up without freedom, I learned how to compartmentalize things. I knew when I could talk about certain things. I knew when I couldn't. My friends and I, we only could hear house music on WNAA 90.1 from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. So that was 3 hours on a Saturday. That was the only time we heard music that we felt was by us, for us. And we would literally set our schedules. We would clear out time and stuff so we could be at somebody's house so that we could hear that music and enjoy being free under the cloak of all of that stuff. So when you look at all of this, how I was under such a heavy cloak of control and I couldn't be myself and I had to lie and I had to do this and that. When you add in predatory behavior, you already come in at a deficit. And then when you have a person who is of a title, a bishop, a pastor, a trustee, a deacon, all of these types of men tried me in the church. The thing that was different about my experience that I sometimes kind of felt bad about was I was protected by the older women in my church. If they weren't going, and my aunts and stuff like that, but the mothers and stuff, if they weren't going to the service, my 15-year-old behind wasn't going. If they weren't going to the revival, my 17-year-old behind was not going. There was one year I was upset, ready to like cry and bawl, and my aunt told me, she said, you can't go to youth convention this year, National Youth Convention. She said, because I can't take off work. And I said, but so-and-so, some other men in the church that were singers and preachers, they were going. She said, I don't care. And I said, that's really me. Like, I was like, why can't you go? She said, because I don't want you coming back messed up. She said, you're not going to be in a hotel room for a week, and I can't come check in. Like, even if you're not in the room with me, I can't come check in. I don't trust those people.
I think it too. Darell, I think that's a really good place, because I just want to stop right there, because I think one of the things that's, I think happens, and that's, you're very fortunate, I would say, in that happened, if that term suits you there. I think in dance, there's a disconnect, because I think popularly, it's assumed that in dance and in the arts, gay people are free. It's assumed, because there are so many in dance and in Black dance, if you will, which I will coin as institutions that dedicate themselves to the edification of Black people and Black bodies through the movement of dance. That's what I will coin dance institutions. Those Black dance institutions, there's a disconnect. Even though there's plenty of gay men there, the discussions about who we are and how we operate are separate from our female friends. So many of the women are friends with and was friends with would not know what to look for in terms of the rape and molestation of men.
No. And they're also subject to whatever pictures we paint of our own agency, our own sense of agency as same gender loving people who have some command of our sexuality, right, at a very, very early age, because it's almost required. If someone is constantly telling you dance like a man, dance like a man, dance like a man, and you're 15 or you're 14, if someone
and then to your point, Jamal, when you start dancing, we all have a persona about us. Yes. Right? I know no one that knew me at 19 would have thought that I was insecure and being preyed upon or put in a what you learn is the armor of bravado through maybe a feminine lens. Maybe I'm like this and I'm ready to read you, honey, and let you know what time it is. The person that's like this, that can get you together, is someone that has had to fight to get there. Yes. So behind folks is oftentimes a whole lot of pain behind that. And we ourselves have, as someone said before, code switched to the detriment of the people around us, because our female friends could not come to our rescue. No. Because for our sexuality, we were told to hide, and there's a disconnect. Yeah. We may go out with girlfriends, but at a certain point, the ladies go that way and all the boys go that way. Yes. The boys are fine,
and they can't see through the chainmail. There's some chainmail that has been built, some armor that is built over years and years and years of exactly what you're talking about. And those girls, no matter how much they love us, are not able to see through that chainmail. They can't actually get to the root of it.
And in my understanding, how much of Black dance is rooted in the traditional Black community, and how much of the traditional Black community is rooted in the Black church. The first time I ever saw Revelations, I already knew the hymn, I've been scorned, because as a young singer, I start training singing spirituals. Even now, when I see a clip of that, or I go see the company, as a singer, the person who was a singer first, then an actor, and then someone who's taken some classes in dance, I always have to fight, because I'm pulled towards the music that I don't really have to fight to take in, but I have to fight to look at, and observe the work. So for me, I see the connection in the respectability politics of the Black community that bleed right into the arts. I have been told that I was, as my hands were too effeminate in my general expression. But the way I could get the way that I didn't have to deal with that in acting is that you're acting the role. If the character is a truck driver and he's written as masculine or heterosexual presenting, then you do that to develop the character, and it's not an attack of your person.
Exactly. So, that point, Darell, as a dancer, there is not a separation intrinsically from your role and who you are. So when you're in a dancing, people are casting you and looking at you and saying, oh, he's too feminine. And indeed, at Broadway tables, I've sat behind the table and seen gay people come to sing and dance, and directors and casting directors, when the person leaves the room, will turn to me and say, we're going to have to butch him up, which really is a disrespect and homophobic to that person, because you haven't given that person a role.
Right.
Yet, conversely, we applaud heteronormative men or cisgender heterosexual men when they're able to act gay. When they come into, they get the Oscars, they get the Tonys, they get the Emmys, and the assumption is that if you're gay, there's nothing you can do about it. So with that, I want to move forward. I want to just set up these 3 pillars that we're going to bring our next guest in with soon. We have patriarchy on one side, which is always running. We have white supremacy on the other side, which these institutions and individuals are suffering under. We have homophobia, which is creating shame, and we have white supremacy, which is all over all of it in terms of Black institutions. That pressure and that specter creates a culture of silence, fear, and shame that makes it a perfect petri dish for predatory behavior and people not speaking out. To that end, we recently, as I'm sure many people know, Troy Powell was released from his position as second company director under allegations and accusations of sexual misconduct. There are in CNN, in The Observer, and in the New York Times. There's also another dance friend of ours, who was a friend of mine, Terrence Green, who was accused of not just misconduct, which I'll get to that in a second, but not misconduct. Levels. Accused of rape and molestation of people that were 14 and 15 years old.
In his country.
And I would like to just say that none of these people can be successful in their predatory behaviors without the complicity, even if it's inadvertently, of any institution. If you create an environment that is unsettled for these predators to work within, then you create a source of liberation and self-love for the individuals that are in it, and mechanisms where people can report and say what has happened. If anybody wants to read those articles, they are there. But again, tonight is not for me to discuss the predators. I want to stay centered on the victims. Now, we're going to bring our friend Addison Ector on, who is around close to this situation with Troy Powell and was pivotal in bringing that to the fore. But before we bring him on, I'm going to allow Jamal to talk about his circumstances with this month.
Right. So, so part and parcel to this show, Beyond the Thread, this all started on a thread. A person that has not been identified even to this day posted on a suspicious account, Instagram account, a TikTok that basically was the TikTok where you see the 2 people dancing forward and then you see them dancing back, and the dancing forward is all about the possibility or promise of something, and then the dancing back is about the crushing thing that eliminated that promise. And this one basically said, if you wanted to get into Ailey too, you got to sleep with Troy. On your first day of ADT rehearsal, Linda had all the leads. So that was put up, and the caption was, here it is, the emoji, here it is, share it, send it around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then everyone seemed to be tagged on this. I mean, the Ailey company, both Ailey companies in that organization, festivals, dance festivals around the country, several different choreographers, Black and White, Katie Couric, me, a lot of us were tagged on this. And my knee-jerk reaction was frustration, because this seemed to fall under a kiki. And my thought initially was, if this is really about sexual harassment or something of that nature, then it should not be toyed with in sort of this, very light, kiki, shady kind of way. But then I stepped back from myself and said, you know what, you need to address it. Someone needs to address it with as much empathy as possible. And I said something, I have a paragraph where basically I said, I believe that everyone should have an opportunity at all times to tell their truth, to speak their truth and tell their stories, no matter who, it offends or uncovers or any of those things. I also said that at that particular moment, because if I remember right, Brian, you can help me with this, this happened really, really close to George Floyd.
It was literally, as I've called from the beginning, I think COVID-19 is the revealer.
Yes.
George created a pressure cooker. And what I said to Jamal, and we're going to bring Addison on very shortly so we can continue this. But what I said to Jamal at the time, what I said to you at the time was, that I knew I had heard these stories for years.
Yeah, and
right?
I had not heard. That was actually part of it. Yeah, is that there was the what was clear. I said that. I said, and I was concerned about people. I knew that people were sitting around inside their houses with no actual shoulder to cry on if they needed to because of quarantine.
Yeah.
I knew that to sort of go through this right now would peel open a whole bunch of scabs. I knew that to the point where I didn't even say anything about that. I dealt only with the sort of socio-political and sort of world things going on. And the context of it was, you know what, this is not the right time. I did emphasize right now because I wanted it to be clear to everyone that you should do this. This just might not be the right time. But what the reason that I bring up that moment is that the responses that came back were not necessarily in response to what I actually said. What it was in response to is a knee-jerk assumption that I was supporting an institution of silencing people. That what was clear to me is that the trauma in the room, the trauma on that thread, was about the fact that so many Black boys in our industry have been told, perhaps even by the Ailey organization, that, you know what, you should be quiet about this. And so what was clear to me is that is its own trauma. The idea of being silent, of sort of taking away any kind of voice you have to share your story, that all by itself was the problem. My response was, tell the story. Don't put up a TikTok. No, tell us what happened. Because of course I didn't know, and apparently there were a lot of people knew, like Brian said. Brian had heard these things. I had only heard actually from one person about anything that smacked of quid pro quo sexual harassment in that context about Troy Powell. And that person is the person that we're going to have on the show shortly. So what's ironic is that he was understanding the perspective and understanding who I am and all of my receipts, in dance advocacy and all that. He was liking every single one of the posts that I had. He was actually my only reference point for this. But the idea that there was an actual arc, a full narrative, seasons long arc of this kind of quid pro quo sexual harassment in this way was astonishing to me.
So why don't we go ahead and bring Addison on? Is he there in the waiting room?
Yes, he is. Let's go ahead and bring on Addison. Hi.
Woo!
Addison,
welcome, Ector. So full disclosure, we have known Ector for years. Was a baby when we met him, and now he's a grown ass man. So
he was grown when I met him.
Oh, he was grown.
Yes. There's that. There's that.
To that point, before I let you go ahead and tell us what happened with you in this circumstance, I just want to say back to what Jamal was saying, that what happens is at that point when you were tagged in that post, Jamal, you felt responsible for the young people in the room, and they felt silenced, that you were going to be part of the culture of silence. Yes. And I think there's something that we do with sexual harassment and things that we go, everybody knows. And everybody is never a specific term. But when you are a victim of sexual misconduct, harassment, violence in any way, 4 people knowing is everybody to you.
Yes.
If somebody in a position of power knows, in your mind, everybody knows.
Yeah, because there's a shame. The shame is magnified by those 4 people. It's exponentially magnified in that moment. It's true. And then also the silence the silence in this case around all of this was so complete. It was so thorough that the people who didn't know really didn't know. That it was because the culture of not telling stories, especially in a Black organization, right? You're going, this is a Black, you go and tell somebody, and then somebody Black is going to be like, what? And, that's what you think it should be. But, carry on, Addison.
Why don't you tell us about your story with your place in this moment?
Oh, from the beginning story or from the TikTok to where we are today?
Wherever you'd like to start.
Yeah, wherever you'd like to start. Because the TikTok, then Ryan, and then me, and then, yes.
Yeah, so it started off with the TikTok. I was in contact with Jamal because, he was the first one to think about me to kind of just check in. And then next thing you know, Ryan Houston, who also was a student at Ailey and a part of the New York Times article or the CNN article, he kind of just made a video saying, like, hey, Ailey, get it together. Y'all really need to, get this under control because it's been years. And his interaction happened in 2010. Mine happened in 2011, 12. And now we're in 2020 still dealing with this. So when he made a video, and then a couple more people made videos, and I just felt compelled, because I felt like the 2 videos that came out before me were very emotional, and they weren't very to the point, and they were making a lot of like petty comments, and you know, the insecurities and all of the emotion was just flooding back, so they were kind of trying to, you know, reel themselves back in when they were trying to say things. So I just felt like, okay, I think we need like a story that's just like emotionless, straight to the point, just say everything that happened, and try not to sugarcoat anything, try not to take away from the experience, you know, just try to be very clear on what is going on and exactly what my experience was. So I made an Instagram video, shared my experience year by year, also kind of explaining how I already knew of his predatory actions before I got to the Ailey school. So I actually
told you you had heard about him before.
Oh, my Black gay teacher from Debbie Allen told me to watch out for him. Like, all right, when you go to Ailey, watch out. And you know, for me, I'm like, I'm just now getting into my gayness, my homosexuality. I'm getting into understanding everything and how the life works. So I was like, oh, I know exactly what you mean. Like, I gotta watch for him. So then I went to the school. I was doing good, and then next thing you know, I get an unwanted picture from him of his genitalia. And since I already had the forewarning, I wasn't trying to like do anything with him. I was like, I already know what you're about, and you're sending me text messages, and I'm saying no. And it's very consistent if you look in the article that a lot of us say, like, we will just be like, no, it's okay, I have class in the morning. It's like, no, I don't want to go out because I have like an 8 a.m. class. Like, that's kind of the border. That's the same excuse that I'm pretty sure everyone said.
How old were you at the time, Addison?
I was 19.
Okay.
And I just came out to my family around 16. But I was still in a private Catholic school. I went straight from Catholic school to Debbie Allen. So I literally had no free time to kind of explore, live my life. So once I moved to New York, I was just free, roaming.
Yeah.
So that's when all the discovery started coming in. And this was like the first experience of like, oh, well, he wants to sleep with me, but I don't want to sleep with him. And in my mind, I was like thinking now, I'm like, why would you be trying to get at me for the job when I should be trying to get at you for the job? Like, if you really are trying to like, well, I don't know exactly why you're trying to get at me. It's like, you're in complete control. Like, I have no control. So after I made my coming back, made the video, and then I got a lot of responses. So many. Oh my gosh. I wasn't expecting a lot of people to be watching my live video, because I was just going to do a live video, post it, and see the response. But I also put a title, and it said like my Ailey story, and then parentheses, former Ailey 2 director. So then I was starting to see Ailey company members join in, and, you know, Ailey students come in, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm starting something now. So then I posted it, a lot of responses, a lot of news people started reaching out to me. And I'm very happy that I like did what I did, because my main focus was protecting the youth. And I was like, I have a lot of students and students that I teach and mentees, and I tell them I literally have to be very specific on, you know, if you want to go to the Ailey school, like, just let me know why. Like, just, like, let's be clear, like, on why you want to choose Ailey, just because of my experience, and if you do have a goal of getting into the second company. Because now I'm also worldly now. So I'm like, there's so many dance communities in the world. It's like, why are you focusing on this Ailey too?
Well, I think, Addison, I want to first, I think all three of us would like to applaud you for your bravery. And for your clarity. I think,
and the completion of your story, you told a complete story.
Yeah.
And to that idea, what's very difficult is to be the perfect victim. I think that burden comes to people who are victims, is to, how am I perfect in this situation? And as you alluded to, many people who tell their stories don't have the presence of mind or clarity of vision or wellness of heart to
or bravery.
Or say again?
Or bravery.
Or bravery. Linearly tell their story step by step. This is what happened, and make it as clear. That is, of course, what we need when we talk about criminality or actions. But I think we also do a disservice to victims when we talk about sexual assault or rape or misconduct in terms of criminality solely. There are things that happen in the gray area we spoke that are still wrong, damaging, and traumatizing. And when we do those things, and we only focus as institutions on, or as people or as leaders on criminality, we leave all those people that are addressed in that gray area to the wolves, so to speak. And also, I think when I posted about Troy's video, I had a pang of nervousness in my own heart, and I only tangentially attached to the organization, but still the posting of it is not at tearing down. I think the common misconception is that we want to tear down and we want to be salacious. And the truth of the matter is the love of Alvin Ailey's vision drew you to the organization to begin with. And the love of that vision is in detriment if we allow people to be predatory within it. If we love the institutions and organizations and people that we say we do, particularly in Black community and Black dance, then being truthful is going to be our only choice. Although that's counterintuitive. Because, as I said before, under the specter of patriarchy, white supremacy, homophobia, all those things, the instinct is to circle the wagons. The instinct is to go, look, let's cover in here. Addison, don't say nothing. We'll handle it. Shh. That's the instinct because there's so much pressure from the outside world. But I think what happens is we become just like the outside world. We create our own Harvey Weinsteins. We create our own predators because specter of shame. But I think, Addison, I just want to reiterate that you having the presence of mind to say, I see some of my brothers struggling to speak clearly. And I have the ability to speak clearly right now. Excuse me. And I have the ability to speak clearly right now. And I'm going to, because this needs to be said clearly and directly. So there's no confusion, there's no kiki, and there's no shade. There is just clarity. Darell, what did you want to say there?
I wanted to say, I'm going to speak on the part that excited me the most in your video, Addison, was where you made people understand that there was dance outside of this one iconic entity, because people are raised to view one thing. They're raised to set one goal. And just like, when I talk to friends, if they've had a bad audition or they don't book something and they are down for 3 days, as if that was the only thing that they were able within their full artistry to do. You were able, through your experience, to build a level of confidence and bravado, and you were not intimidated. You were no longer shaken. As I was watching, I was like, this baby has been all over the world. And when I say baby, that's just a term different because I love you. I'm not calling you a baby. I was like, he's been all over the world. He has earned his own money. He is now teaching. He has other people that look up to him. I have posted the picture of you on point with like the leg up, and I posted that 1,000 times. And I'm like, I'm like,
oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, we all own bits and pieces of acting in this way. Right. And as if I had anything to do with any of it,
Yeah, and like I posted, I'm like, can football players do this? Can basketball players do this? And I've always posted like all pictures, but specifically, I always say that dancers are athletes, dancers are powerful. And I really appreciate the fact that, like some people in the articles that I read about this and other scene articles, stuff like that, some of the people were saying, where you read, they didn't want their identity to be revealed because they still have a relationship with the company or they have yada, yada, yada. You didn't care. Right. Like me, listen, Brian, Jamal, they're always pulling me in because I normally don't care. I will say whatever I need to say to protect people. And I was burdened, and there was a pain because those people were saying they didn't want to be revealed because they still had a relationship with the company. And I just wanted to commend you and say you stood in your power. Like you said, there are tons of other companies out here to dance for. There is dance all over the world. Just like Raven Wilkinson left America to dance.
To go dance somewhere.
She didn't stop dancing at America. She went to Europe. She was all over the world. So I just wanted to commend you on that.
Addison, I have a question. Oh, you can thank him. Go ahead if you want to.
Thank you.
I have a question. Speaking to all of that for you. One of the things that we discussed offline during all of this is, or that I shared with you, one of my concerns, and I didn't even put this out there on the original thread because I was nervous. I didn't want anybody in the media to see it and go, oh, that's a brilliant idea. But I was concerned that, of the level of victim shaming that comes from outside, in moments in moments of Me Too, in moments of sort of expressing that I have been the victim of something. I'm wondering, did you have any kind of worries or moments of worries about that kind of public excoriation, the kind of dragging that happens when you're put out? Did you have that thought, even if you conquered it, but did you have that wonder? Did you have that worry?
No, because once I knew that, like, my connections with Ailey, I just go to the building, whenever I'm in New York, just to make your presence known, use the bathroom, and then kind of just be on my merry way. Especially after all of that, because it wasn't just the Troy issue, in my own personal story. It wasn't just Troy that was a piece of my Ailey story. It was also everything that happened after that and my relationship.
You did report at the time, didn't you?
Oh,
yeah.
I have a whole story. Oh, I'll tell you guys the story. But I didn't even report it. It got out. Somebody, I told a friend who then told a friend who then in a wellness class during lunchtime, the teacher was asking, she wanted a serious conversation to happen, right? So she's kind of pressuring the students, hey, you guys, if there's anything you really want to talk about, anything going on. So she's really trying to pull this out. And then one of the girls, she was like, there's a lot of student-teacher relationships happening in the school. So then instead of students, being like, oh my gosh, are you serious? All the students were like, yeah, you're right. It was something like that.
Telling your story right there, the concept of your girlfriends at the time was you are having a relationship with someone because you received an inappropriate picture.
But
even in the conversation, there's not an understanding of inappropriate behavior, right? We're not understanding the power dynamic. And just for everybody who's watching, unless you could tell somebody to get out of your face and I don't want to talk to you without worry about your job, your life, your livelihood, you are not on equal footing to consent or not to consent.
Yes.
So, and then you went on to report it to the directors, is that correct?
Well, the teacher heard about that. She went to the school directors. The school director sought out the girl who said, whoever said it, and then she blurted out multiple names on how many student-teacher relationships there were, and I was one of them. So then that's when the school directors came and sought me in the lobby of the Ailey building, brought me to their office, and then addressed the issue, asking for if I had proof of the image that I was received. And I was like, no, I don't have it. I deleted all contacts. And they were like, well, there's nothing we can do because we don't know if it was his picture, because it was just of his area. It wasn't of his whole head to toe. So they were like, we don't have any proof, so there's nothing we can do. And that was the end of the conversation. And I left oh, wow, y'all are what was the point of this meeting?
Yeah. End up leaving the school, or what happened after that?
Oh, I just, because I was once he sent me the message and I deleted it, I think that was a little while. So I already threw it out because I had nothing, I literally just shut him off. And then every time I would see him, it was just cordial, say hello, and then keep it pushing. But I moved on from the situation because I was able to, I was prepared to. And then
the Ailey school after that?
No, I stayed for another year and a half. And it was crazy because I think the biggest two things that happened was that after that situation happened, and my meeting with the school directors happened end of the year, so December 2011. So the Ailey 2 audition happens in the spring of 2012. So I went to the Ailey 2 audition and was offered an apprenticeship. So, there was maybe 7 of us left, 5 of them got contracts, and then 2 of us got apprenticeships. I was offered by him an apprenticeship. 2 days later, I had my one-on-one meeting with him with the associate director, and he was like, oh, you need to work on your triple turns and double tours. And I was like, okay, I can work on that. And that he was like, yeah, we really just want you to work on that. I was like, okay. And then he said, thank you. And then I left. And then I was like, so am I not an apprentice? Like, did he take it away? Is this just what he wants me to work on? Like, and then
I just want to stop you right there and just say the wildly inappropriate nature of you having to be in a meeting and still audition for someone who's been a predator at this aspect, and for you to be in the presence of mind to still be able to take tutelage from this person and then potentially be in a company and under his tutelage and on tour around the country and indeed the world with the same person who has been inappropriate with you is where we run into a very difficult problem. We don't. Addison, I'm going to stop you. In the interest of time, I want to keep you here, but I would love to bring on, we have a healthcare professional with us. Her name is Dr. Latoya Conner. She's a clinical professor, a psychologist, a yoga teacher, a public speaker, and she's here with us today. Well, welcome. So just from your perspective, and I know that you specialize in trauma in these situations, what are some of the insights you have after listening to the conversation this evening?
I think ultimately, it's a miscarriage of justice and abomination of authority and leadership when individuals, dancers, young men and boys are preyed upon by those who they look up to and who we expect will guide them in positive, healthy ways and relationships. And one of the telltale signs, the questions that I'm asked often in my work as a forensic expert working on sexual abuse cases or sexual misconduct cases is, what do we look for? What are the grooming behaviors? There are always signs, whether it's sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, or even depression, suicide. We don't always see the signs because we don't know what they are. And it puts a significant amount of burden on the person who's being preyed upon and those who are being oppressed to then defend themselves against predators and offenders. And however, we do hold institutions responsible, organizations responsible for doing the right thing. Every organization, school, sporting league, clergy, all the other places where we are seeing this pandemic, if you will, right? This sexual predatory pandemic. They all have rules, regulations, and guidelines. All are mandated reporters when you have youth amongst your midst. So there's a significant violation of trust. The authority figures need to be held accountable. And some of the grooming behaviors, there are 6 different types of grooming behaviors that we see in this work. Some of you've been talking about it in a very brave and bold way. That is important for really having a voice and sharing that voice in this work. So what happens with leaders, dance teachers, other instructors or people in authority in our lives who attempt to groom for these sexual misconduct, if you will, is that they begin to form relationships or we are already in relationship with them. And if it's in some place where you are under the age of 18, parents might say, caregivers might say, or our community might say, do what they want, follow the rules so that you can, get approval really, or get the part, right? And so the idea is that they're on the up and up, but they'll form the relationship with an ulterior motive. That's number one. Number two is that they'll test your boundaries. So it might be, as Addison was saying, it might be an exposure with showing a picture, right? But not having the head in the photo. So exposure, testing your boundaries. It might be physical touch or contact. I've read several articles, the CNN article about the incident over the years with the former director, Alvin Ailey, and there was some boundary testing, allegedly, in the article with overnight, guests being allowed to stay if they missed their train or bus or something of that nature. So really taking advantage of the circumstances. Number three is that there's touching, and it could be just a beloved type of tap or touch or kiss on the forehead, or, you know, just caressing with an accidental touch of different body parts, or what appears accidental. There's intimidation, number 4, and that intimidation comes with the misuse of power, authority, and silencing of individuals, right? If you speak up, right, you might not be believed. Many people did speak up. And even if it was indirect and then direct or direct, there seems to be a lapse in protocol. And so the intimidation factor is real from some of the stories I read about where people did make the part. They weren't a part of the, you know, the dance team. So, you know, there's intimidation that's a huge factor. Sharing sexually explicit material that becomes part of the grooming behavior. And the grooming behavior is the behavior by which an individual will gain your trust to begin to go further in terms of that sexual misconduct. And number 6 is communicating in secret. So that's where the shame and the internalized stigma comes in. And I think society as a whole erroneously assumes that men are powerful in a physical sense, and somehow if they are sexually assaulted or victimized, then somehow there's a dehumanizing aspect where somehow we see individuals as weak, or we start, you know, victim blaming and shaming.
So the EEOC reports that 17% of the 6,800 cases in, say, 2015, which has been pretty consistent, that only 17% are men. Is that the reason that we're not reporting? Is what you said? I mean, is that part of it? The sort of the idea that, you know, it's not okay for us as men to say this?
I think that's part of it, for sure. I mean, I think those numbers are incredibly low. The statistics will say that 1 in 4 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime or in an annual year and in their lifetime, and 1 in 6 men. And I found that to be in some families and communities and organizations, 3 in 3, 6 in 6. And what's happening is that, so I specialize in grief and trauma, and I teach classes on grief and trauma, and my heterosexual and gay identified male or bisexual identified male students will disclose in my class for the very first time about their childhood sexual assault or adult or adolescent victimization in a class of grief and trauma as they're training to become counselors. Never yet before had they expressed it. And I've also worked in cases with individuals who were incarcerated in federal prison in Manhattan, and they, as a part of the case, let's say the case was on some other, you know, criminal felony or a violation of probation, what I have unveiled through that process of connecting with them and meeting with them in lockup is child sexual abuse that had not been uncovered. I mean, we're talking about people who've been in the revolving door of the criminal justice or injustice system, however you see it, from ages 11 to 19 with sexual abuse at 11, and no one asking, or at least them not disclosing, right? So there's a research study that said around 65% of women who have been sexually assaulted, even at the time in which a rape kit has been conducted and we have the DNA and we have the evidence, will deny that they were sexually assaulted. 65%.
65%.
65. And I don't have that number for men because, back to your question, we teach men to underreport. Yes.
Yep. That lack of reporting is what I wanted to talk about and have the show for, is because I titled it Us Too, not to just piggyback on a theme or a hashtag, but to say Me Too intentionally by Tarana Burke was meant to be for all victims of sexual violence. But somehow it took distinction within white women, it took distinction within women only, and that was never her intention when she started the hashtag. Her intention, as from her own voice, was for all victims of sexual violence and misconduct, rape, molestation, and all those things was to have all of the victims have a voice and to be victim-centered. And I think the cultures of silence create a culture that is perfect for rape. And as I was saying earlier, Latoya, the culture of homophobia and where it meets patriarchy, where it meets Black respectability politics and Black maleness, creates a space where Black men feel as though if this happens to me, I have to take the organization on my back. Mm-hmm. As I alluded to earlier, when I posted about Troy's thing, I felt scared internally because I was trained at the Ailey School and I love the vision of Alvin Ailey. And this organization is important, not just to dance, but to the world. And inside of me, from a young age, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna say this. Will it affect my career? Will people shun me? And this is just for me posting an article that was already written by 5 world-renowned institutions. And to that point, on my page, where we get regular likes, there were 4 likes and 2 comments.
Yep.
And that 4 likes, and then over the week, it went up to like 14 and like 2 comments. So there was no discussion within the community that I am, because all of us have a backpack of Black solidarity that does not allow us to tell truths, to create true Black solidarity. Yes. We can only, I believe wholeheartedly, we can only create true solidarity and unification if we all have a place to stand safely and be there in truth. If we're not there in truth, then we're imitating white supremacy, we're imitating patriarchy, and we will fall in the same way those institutions fall. Darell, you want to say?
And people don't really understand the lasting effect when someone is not believed by people that they look up to or that they trust. There was a guy, a grown man, I was an adult, but he was older than me, who made an advance in me. He was Christian folk, church folk. And I was asked, well, why did he feel comfortable enough to make an advance? As if I was supposed to, like women, why was the skirt so short? Or where were you going? And this was my aunt who asked us, well, what did you do? Why did he feel so comfortable making a pass or an advance at you? And that stuck with me for a very long time. Even though I was a young adult, I was like 19, this was still something that happened to me. And I was the only person who was questioned. They were okay, because we don't question men. We don't question men that are hetero-presenting. We don't question men of a whatever level. And I've always, and I'm thinking back, I've always been looked at differently because I was effeminate. Everything was an attack. My other friends in my community and that I sang with in chorus, they were gay, but they were more masculine, just naturally, just like I'm naturally more feminine. So people really don't understand how long it can take someone to get over not being believed.
Latoya, can you speak a little bit to that, the length of time that it takes for people, if ever, to get through, over, whatever the terminology is?
Right.
Yes, I would love to. And Darell, I just want to, speak to what you shared. And thank you for sharing. I want you to know that we don't get over these things. Mm-hmm. We don't get over the lack of trust, the lack of protection, the lack of support, the lack of intervention on our behalf. We learn to live with them.
Yeah.
And the way that we can learn to live with them over a lifetime is with positive corrective experiences. People stepping in and providing that leadership without crossing the boundary. People showing up on your behalf, believing in you. I think that when people are lacking in belief, in other words, denying the problem, there's something that they're silencing within themselves. And that then I would question that disbelief. I think that's a barrier to disclosure. It's the denial of the problem, the hierarchy on suffering, which I think you touched on. And I want to say, number one, there is no hierarchy on suffering. Okay. So from the full spectrum of men to boys to girls to trans to women to everyone on the full spectrum, we don't give a hierarchy to suffering, to trauma, to grief, period. But I think society does. And because of that, and as you've experienced, right, that further silences and shames, and then that leads to victim blaming, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the short answer is that we don't get over it. We learn to live with it. Now, when I testify in court cases, judges might say, or opposing counsel might say, well, do you mean to tell me that this child or this young person or this young adult or this man will never heal? And that's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that healing is a journey of a lifetime. This experiences and the assault on the psyche and the suffering of the soul, that leaves an imprint on your memory center in your brain that's really deep in your limbic system, your emotional center, that then leaves a handprint in the sand or a footprint in the sand on your hippocampus, which is your memory center. So when you go back to any type of experience that might mirror that original, aggressive experience, assaultive experience, the lack of belief, then you will have a similar physiological, neurological reactivity and reaction. So it leaves a permanent imprint. So how do you get over that? How do you change that? How do you change that memory? Even if it can be conscious or it could be unconscious or subconscious, right? But it's still there.
Yeah. You mentioned the legal aspect of this, and one of the things that bothered me a lot when sort of looking at patterns of reporting for men, and just patterns of how the legal system deals with sexual harassment. Part of it goes to this whole idea of Title VII as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which describes sexual discrimination, but doesn't equate it to sexual harassment. And all of the language around it is in very archaic notions of what gender means. It's very gender neutral idea. So the litmus test for whether or not someone's being sexually harassed in court is going to be if there's an attraction from the person in power. And this is, of course, in quid pro quo. Is there an attraction from the person in power to the person who is being, assaulted or harassed, as it were? Is it based on attraction? And that usually means a man and a woman, because we're assuming that that's the power dynamic. It's very, very sort of Mad Men, and so over the years, I mean, naturally there were things thrown out. If I am in my office building and my employer or my supervisor gets two other coworkers to hold me down while he puts his penis on my neck and my arm, then that should qualify as sexual harassment. And as far as the law was concerned before, because of the way that gender is dealt with, it did not, because these were all heterosexual men. So, we got there in the 90s, things turned around, and, finally courts are starting to rule differently, and then writing, so that there's some kind of precedent for change in that. But do you find that that's something that sort of the idea of gender neutrality that excludes gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, does that play a part in, are we still so behind that it's playing a part in how you are addressing or dealing with this kind of thing?
As a psychologist, it has not come up in my work, but I think that's also with a limited experience, right? Like I've not worked on the full spectrum to really see how the law handles those varied, perplex, if you will, issues that don't, or sexual identities that don't fit that archaic mold, if you will. So the cases I work on, it's a clear-cut, state law in terms of a violation. And from a psychological perspective, when we look at the code within the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry, you can have a person be sexually assaulted or abused or psychologically abused, even with the exposure, right? So the psychological standard is different from the legal standard. But I think if you look at personal injury law and tort law, it's still a violation. A violation is a violation is a violation is a violation.
Yeah, right.
You know that there are these archaic, ways of handling, throughout the system, absolutely, and a lot of bias. So we're talking about toxic prejudice and homophobia. Okay, but that does show up, and I think that permeates our society.
Sure.
It has not been something that I directly interjected
Right.
with experience myself yet, but yeah, I'm sure it is.
That was an actual case too. That Onkel versus Sundowner. That actually happened. I was describing something that actually happened, and they ruled in favor of the company and said that because it wasn't based on any form of attraction, or that basically the plaintiff did not have a case.
How could they prove that? How could they prove there was no attraction?
Yeah, that was, it sort of fell into hostile work environment, which is the other part of Title VII, sort of where sexual harassment falls into. But again, because we're starting to we're dealing with gender in that, they kind of.
Well, I think it's a good place. I want, in the interest of time, because I know Addison and Latoya have to go soon, but I did want to say that I love what you said, Latoya. A violation is a violation is a violation is a violation. Because I think that when we talk about sexual harassment, many people, my peers, were talking about criminality. Mm-hmm. And that was in the way in which institutions approach that. And we know that criminality is provable recompense in a legal way. Right. There's so much damage that happens before something is against the law. And if we are interested in loving our Black selves, loving our Black institutions, loving the art we choose to create, then what we want to create is an environment that is caustic to sexual harassment. We want to create an environment where people are able to show up as their entire selves. And then as they are able to do that, we will see an environment where people know that that's not going to be okay here, because we're going to accept Addison, and we're going to accept Darell, and we're going to accept Latoya, we're going to accept Jamal, we're going to accept Bryant, and we're going to accept all these people as who they are, and we're going to protect their right to identify as human beings before they are an artist, a dancer, a singer, an actor, an activist. Because some of the predatory nature, Latoya and I were speaking earlier, some of the predatory nature comes from your identity being usurped by your institution.
Yes.
So your identity is usurped. And I can say this personally, when you train to be a dancer on a certain level, and anybody that trains hard, I'm sure, Latoya, you getting your PhD, anybody doing something that's working very hard, you go into that with this degree of determination. And especially when you wear the skin that we're all sitting in, there is that layer of proof, and I'm going to make this happen. So you're being told every day that there's a degree of normalization about rape and getting over it. We love to talk about, for instance, people use this regularly, Oprah Winfrey, she was raped, look at where she is. And that's where she is based on our perception of where she is, because what she has may not be where she is internally. Right. And only she and the people that know her will know that.
Yeah, we're being very presumptuous. We're being very presumptuous when we make statements like that about the people that we see, particularly in the media, because, it suggests a certain level of proximity we have to their souls and their spirits and their well-being and their mental states, none of which are really our business in that way. So
and it's different in the arts, because if I take on a position with American Express, there's a booklet, there is a portion in the training, there is a meeting, and I was
an HR.
I was thinking the other day about a workshop that I was doing, and it's literally the first time that I was, and this was 2 years ago. It was literally the first time that I ever felt completely safe, because the space was made safe by everybody in the room. I can talk about it. It was a workshop for the musical A Strange Loop. This was a year before I went to Off-Broadway. I was invited to work on the workshop.
I'm going to interrupt right there. I'm going to let Latoya and Addison go, and then we're going to get into the point of it. I want to thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Conner, you were fantastic today.
Thank you.
So much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story, Addison. Again, we applaud your bravery, your truth, honesty, and your continued growth through your artistry and your humanity is what we are here to support. Don't ever forget that. Latoya, I'll give you the last word before you go on out of here.
I want to thank you for holding space for our community, for giving voice to the voiceless, and for bringing this issue to the forefront. And I think that that's how we humanize each other and continue to hold everybody accountable. Nobody gets a pass on this one.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to let you guys go on.
Thank
Have a
you.
great. Bye, Addison. Okay. Hi, everybody. So here we are back with our Beyond the Thread group. This was a difficult, I shouldn't say difficult. This was a challenging moment for myself to bring forward. I've always been a truth teller and a speaker, and I think the three of us have that in common here. But even this, because when it hits close to home, when it's people that you grew up with, it's difficult to address that. And I want to hold space at the moment for the idea that you have to create protocols and cultures that hold, as Latoya said, everyone accountable.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a child tomorrow, Jamal was the best man at my wedding, but my child has to be safe. And although I love and know Jamal and trust him with my life, before I trust him with my child's life, I have to set up protocols, parameters, and ideals of safety for my child and reporting mechanisms so that Jamal is safe and I am safe.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't do that, it's time for our cultural identities as Black people, Black gay men, and Black institutions to step into the 21st century in which we create spaces where all of us can show up as we are and are afforded the ability to speak truthfully to power. Loving institutions has never been, as we say as Black people about the United States, we speak truth to you because we love you. We want it to. This is what we're speaking truth to. We are saying these names. We are talking about these circumstances, not out of an aspect to tear it down and to bring defame, but to support the things so things don't rot from the inside. Because if the people that are in your charge are rotting on the inside from sexual trauma and being ignored and left alone to rot on the vine, then eventually the organization will rot in the same. And Darell, to that end, we talked about creating safer environments. You were saying about creating the safe environment you felt recently that you were able to be within.
Yeah, I was invited to fill in for one of the actors who was a part of the company that would be the off-Broadway show, A Strange Loop. And Michael R. Jackson is one of my favorite people, a dear friend, a wonderful intellectual writer, Pulitzer Prize winner. And before we got started, we had the regular conversation, welcome, yada, 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 all the equity rules, who's going to be the deputy, all this kind of stuff. But because of the subject matter, they did the work before we got there. Or I'll say before I got there, because some of them had been a part of it or whatever. But they did the work of saying, we are going to make sure that this space is okay for everybody that is involved. That show, anyone who's familiar with that show, talks about, it's a coming of age. It talks about sexuality. It talks about different types of abuse, family, verbal, physical, sexual. And it's just a Black gay man figuring life out. Some of the songs, when we sang through them, I said, are we going to say this out loud? So the content mixed in with the staging and choreography at some point was going to lend itself to a sexual interaction or feeling or touching or whatever. And they let us know in the beginning, if anything gets uncomfortable, I think we had like levels 1, 2, or 3. So if some choreography or a scene that was sexual got a bit too much, we could say 3, and they would immediately fix it or adjust it so that everyone felt safe. Mm-hmm. I had never been in that type of environment where I knew from start 10 a.m. to 5 or whatever, from lunch break, coming back from, I knew that I was looked after, I was going to be okay. And it encouraged even the smallest of like aggressions or whatever, or the smallest infractions. Everyone else was like, that's not acceptable with one of the people that was there. So I'm just saying, you have to make the space safe. Like Dr. Conner said, people exposed for the first time in her class that they've dealt with certain things, because prior to that, there was no safe space. They had to be on guard. They had to present. They had to be this like person. And until you have a safe space in life, my safe spaces have been people. They have been seclusion. Like until you have a safe space, you can't even begin to work out the issues of life.
And Jamal, you work with SAG-AFTRA quite a bit.
Yes.
We know that with SAG-AFTRA, they recently created a position called the intimacy
Intimacy
coordinator.
coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. The
I will be right back.
Okay. The unions, not just SAG-AFTRA, but SAG-AFTRA especially, and I say this with no bias, particularly because of the work that happens on screen and on camera, the number of times that you're doing takes of very compromising situations. The union has been very, very diligent about establishing protocols, boundaries, words, things that can be said, mechanisms and pipelines for addressing what happens if you feel uncomfortable, and also creating pipelines for the work to happen in such a way that the two people involved in the intimacy are able to sort of work in it and feel safe. So to your point earlier, it's sort of about a preventative approach. It's sort of about getting ahead of it. Meaning, let's not wait until the two people are in the making out scene and these are actors who may have just met. Let's actually start to deal with the rehearsal with the intimacy coordination involved. Let's integrate all of that from the very beginning. So that's part of what the union has done with creating that position is it's not just about dealing with sort of what happens after, the fire, after the fire is like raging over there. It's how do we prevent that fire from happening and actually create workspaces that are going to be fruitful and safe and healthy for the people in them. Absolutely.
I think if I could just, if I leave us out tonight, and I'll just say, do we have any questions, by the way? Have we had any questions?
I didn't see any. I've been checking. It doesn't seem like there are any. But there's a lot of there are a lot of people there are a lot of people on the thread, viewers that feel that this resonates with them, and I'm happy to know that. I think it's important to note. I mean, I know you said as much, Brian, but I want to really push it forward that this is that this kind of conversation, and it's one that I recommended. One of the fallouts from the TikTok is that a few people, there was a lot of dialogue happening in there, and I quelled the notion of me sort of advocating for silence by reminding everyone that I'm a person who has challenged the Ailey organization before by standing very, very, very tall and strong and firm with AGMA as a person on the board of SAG-AFTRA during the negotiations to be paid better, to be paid what they were worth. And so I'm never one, and I think that's true about the two of you as well. I'm never one who sort of shies away from standing up against an institution when I think that the practices of that institution are less than good or less than right. But when I did talk,
I was going to say, what I think is so ironic sometimes about our fears and not speaking truth to our institutions that we do love and care about. What I think is so interesting about that is we learn that behavior from those institutions.
We did, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
The truth of the matter is, Alvin Ailey, the organization, stands as a beacon, right, in the world still to this day of Black excellence, right, of Black education, and what we want from our institution is for them to hold true to those promises and to broaden the horizon as we go forward. Perhaps when Alvin Ailey was alive and when in his death, the idea of gay liberation was something that he didn't even dream of for his dancers, and so now, or himself. So now that we're forward in 2020, we can stand on his shoulders and tell another truth. And through the deeper truth, we will be able to have a culture that, again, makes predatory behavior and sexual abuse of people unpalatable to that organization. It should feel like a piece of something is dropped in acid and everything attacks it to make sure that it is gone. It's not that we'll never be able to prevent people's misconduct, but we can make an environment in which that misconduct is unattractive to predators. And if we keep the truth, and if we keep silent, and if we allow rumor to hover. Also, I want to just touch on these couple of things. I want to touch on reporting. Jamal, go finish your point before I go.
The only thing I was gonna say to that is that I in the course of that off the thread, beyond the thread, my conversation with a dancer at Ailey who understood all of the things that I was trying to protect, namely the other dancers that this has happened to, namely the people who are in that company and are now going, wow, it's being put out there that the only reason I'm here is that I slept with this man, which may or may not be true, right? Was how then do we go about, what is the answer? If this is not the way, if a TikTok on the thread is not the way, then what is the way, right? And I said that this that we're doing right now, I believe is the way, is to create these. Now, granted, this is a very open, public space, right? But what I suggested to him is, how about we bring in a Dr. Conner, and how about we sit on the Zoom in the safety of our private spaces and then learn how to tell our stories. That's one thing. How to find the bravery and everything that we discussed with Addison to just sort of actually realize that, so that we're not, as Dr. Conner mentioned, waiting until we're in transition to therapy to actually become therapists, to tell the stories, that this is one of the in a private version. That's one of the things I recommended or that I suggested. And it was disheartening for a minute, because I had sent that out there. I sent that invitation out there, like, you guys let me know. I will set it up. I'll pay for the therapist. I'll make it a private space. We'll do it. And still, we weren't able to get to that. It still became too scary for someone to say, yes, I want to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I have received so many private messages that I honor, and I will honor their privacy, but people have written me prior to any of this happening, prior to 2020, telling me they appreciated me creating a space where they felt safer. And I like, my friend Toria Beer always says safer space, because safe space that I can prevent it in total from happening, which we cannot do. But we can create safer spaces where people feel like they have voice. And people have spoken to me about saying they felt like they had voice and were not preyed upon in my presence. And I take that to heart. And I think I want to talk about reporting and ways forward. I think, first of all, those of us that have dancers in our charge, it is our job, first of all, if we're supposed to be mandatory reporters if we're teaching children or anybody underage.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be a reporter. That's first of all. But if you're teaching people that are not underage, adults are sexually harassed, and the trauma, as Dr. Conner put out there, violation is violation is violation.
Yes.
And in the jobs that I've had outside of the arts community, there are protocols in place that can redirect behavior before it becomes criminal and before it becomes overwhelmingly traumatizing to all parties involved. Every discussion of sexual harassment and misconduct does not end in firing or jail. It may end in a redirection. It may end in therapy for the people that are stuck in their own cycles of abuse oftentimes. And although I'm not saying I want to go out of my way to take care of people who have been predators, but at the same time, we can be rest assured that a predator was probably prey at one point in their life.
There's a cyclical part of it.
And the way that I think that we stop the cyclical nature of that is by having open, clear conversations and saying things plainly in an effort to love on the organizations that we come from. And I just can't speak clearly enough or strongly enough to the fact that you feel when you report these things, you're betraying something.
Yes.
There's a sense of, even now as I'm speaking and we're having this show, and I think it went very well and people are happy for it, I know the people watching are afraid for themselves.
Yeah.
And that fear is coming from the idea that institutions and organizations are more important than individuals. And institutions or organizations are nothing without those individuals.
Absolutely. That's all they are.
I think one of the things that I can highlight from my own personal experience is we can't underestimate the reach of our voices. We can't underestimate the power that we actually have to make a space safe. Sometimes, like when I was growing up and people would sincerely ask me, hey, how you doing? It's good to see you. That actually made me feel safe versus a correction, versus an admonishment to be another type of person. So sometimes showing yourself friendly is like one of the starting places to like making people feel safe. And Brian, you guys have said this to me 1,000 times. You can't underestimate the power of like posting, the power of social media, stuff like that. You can't underestimate who's watching you. And when people are posting and sharing and their first response is to negate or side-eye someone who's made a claim, that's what keeps the cycle going. So,
well, if the idea of culture, I think, to me, in ways forward, we're talking about institutions looking for ways forward. One of the ways forward is to take off the culture where the individuals that are in the organizations are mute, deaf artists who are there to do an art, and particularly in dance.
Employees.
Speak afterwards. Not to speak afterwards. We are full human beings and adults who have a right to be. And if you're a young person, you are a full person. Your spiritual, mental, intellectual being is important. And for that not to be absent from the way that we create art. Also, I know that in dance, one of the things that happens, because we're not necessarily having text and creating a character, is this idea, I mentioned this in the beginning, but I want to go back to this. The idea that I can embody a character based on my understanding of the art form, not based on what you see in front of you. So those of us in the front of the room constantly judging people in their behavior. And indeed, it's a gray area, because when Ulysses Dove created Vespers, or Tally Beatty put me in a piece, they're looking at my energy and saying, oh, this would be a great part for you. So where that gets blurry is if you come in and people assume you effeminate, or assume you, and just to put clearly, so we can make this be clear for everybody that's watching, that is all construct. Masculinity, gender is a construct. The behaviors that denote to that gender are really a construct.
Yes.
They change regionally and they change internationally. So that means,
and they change chronologically, because depending on what period you're in.
If you're prior to hip hop, if you go back and look at what Al Green was wearing, if he wore that today, they definitely would have called him feminine and gay.
Oh yeah.
Oh no. If we go back and look at Don't Push Me, if we go and look at Curtis Blow. You know,
of the beginning of hip hop, all of those things. So just to say that for people watching, is that masculinity and femininity is all on a spectrum, and you should be able to access that in your real life as you see fit. But when we come with space and we start talking about, okay, I'm going to be Romeo. Well, if you say that I'm too feminine to be Romeo, I'm no more Romeo in real life than I am going to be that tree that I'm playing on the side. The idea that you're going to create a character, and if you can embody the behaviors of that character, then that role should be there. But what happens for men, and even in acting and in the commercialization, because again, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, all those things are operating. We got to sell it. We have to sell this singer as an actual sexual icon rather than the song and the fantasy that they're creating. We have to sell the dancer as an actual masculine entity, rather than he's going to be somebody who's going to be wonderful in the space. And when they leave the stage, if they want to put on a gown, they can put on a gown.
And we have to sell. We have to sell them all the way down to, listen, it's not okay for you as a female, as a woman, as a recording artist to actually be married. Then we need part of the selling of you is that everyone's going to be able to sleep with. Like, we have to feel like we can. So yeah, outside of that, go ahead and be married over there, but just don't make that a big deal. You know, and Romeo wears a blouse on stage. He wears a blouse and tights.
Yeah. And if we take that just a step further and say, if I had grown up with the gay men that I knew to be gay around me being able to say, this is my partner, if they had one. Yes. Because I grew up with all of the heterosexual people, or their wives, husbands, pictures,
free,
children,
open,
always would be around. All of the men that were my mentors, and even to this day, many of them died alone. And not just the men, the marriage to the art, there is a occupational hazard to that, where connecting to other people, they become second to your art. That I'm not addressing. I'm addressing the tapestry of people, and throughout the tapestry of people, as a young Black dancer, I rarely saw a Black man come in with his partner. I rarely saw anybody say that I could be in the studio. It was very hushed. And again, that hush is problematic. Somebody asked this question. Adrian Hurd asked, how do students now at Ailey feel safe? Here's my answer to that. I think, because I can't speak for Ailey, I can't speak to how anybody feels safe. I can only speak to the fact that I think that this has been addressed. I think that Ailey addressed it by relieving the person of their duties and trying to move forward. But in moving forward, we can't go back, right? So the idea, now that we move forward, what I would say is to people that teach there, to people like myself who have connections to people that are there, is that we open conversations about what happened. Instead of closing doors and saying, we're not going to, that happened, that was embarrassing, we're not going to discuss it. We have to just, so that we can pull it out. Forward. It has to be aired out. You have to pick up the carpet, get rid of the mold, get everything out of there so that you can stand on solid ground. You cannot stand on solid ground if you're hiding secrets. And secrets never, I'm going to say this very clearly, secrets have never kept any institution or any person safe for any long period of time.
No, there's always a curfew on that. There's always a curfew on that. I would also say to Adrian that a place to start, perhaps, in sort of having this conversation is to let people know what they can do, let them know that they have agency. So the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has 53 offices that can be contacted by anybody who feels that they're victims or finds it necessary after they've gone through the process in their building or at their workplace or at their learning institution. If you've already gone through those channels that are there and said, hey, this person sent me this picture, or hey, this wasn't okay, or hey, you know, I didn't like the way that I was touched, and then nothing was done, you can then go to the EEOC and report to them, and then they will take it up, okay? And the EEOC, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, it was formed to be sort of the sentinel for the discrimination, sexual discrimination portion of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's still in existence, and people still report to them all of these things. So maybe one of the things, as Brian said, I am the same way. I have no fealty to Ailey. I haven't actually, unlike Brian, I haven't been through any aspect of the training, the programs, the auditions. I've never actually had any engagement with Ailey in that way. But I would say that if I had to deal with moving forward, I would move forward positively and proactively and maybe offer that as information to a classroom full of people and say, hey, if this ever happens to you, here's what you can do. And if you aren't satisfied with what was done, then here's another way. And I'll put that on our website, on our page.
And to just say that Ailey is the subject because it happened this week.
Yeah.
But the matter is, this happens all throughout the arts industry. It happens on Broadway, it happens in television and film,
yes.
It happens in small studios across the country. The culture of silence, because again, arts institutions are already a struggle.
Yeah.
Arts and Black arts institutions are already on a double struggle.
Yes.
And Black men are already under a struggle. My idea behind starting this whole entire show was the idea that if we speak to lifting all of that, if we lift off the shame around everything, then we are able to live free and actually speak truth to power without feeling like that we're going to have the end of our organizations because we said this has happened. But we can have healing conversations internally, and if there's exposing, we can say, yes, we're addressing this, as opposed to trying to live in some perfect idea of respectable place where you could never be. The organization in general is made up of individuals. Yeah. So the individuals in the organization have to feel like there's a commonality into their ability to speak truth to the power of the organization. And sometimes when organizations become, in our minds, too big to fail or too big to address, we do not address them. And then conversely, those organizations become so huge, it's easy because there's a lot to do in an organization. There's a lot to do starting this show. There's a lot to do. So in that thing of I got to do this and I'm getting international flight this and go over there with that, it's easy to lose sight of Darell and what his needs are in this moment. So these institutions have to create departments and culture that stays connected to that part of the humanity. Go ahead, Darell.
And I feel like we should also remember that when we don't do all this, when we don't believe the person we're reporting it, or not like just believe that they're correct, but like if we don't say, yes, we're going to look into it versus, well, yada, yada, yada. When we don't do that, we keep feeding the predator. We keep over and over and over. And what happens is, as we've seen in tons of cases from Weinstein to Cosby, all these people take on an attitude that they are above reproach. So at a certain point, they start to do things where you're like, what was he thinking? Didn't he think he was going to get caught? Or didn't she think she was going to get caught with people that are abusing power? And no, they don't think that, because they've gotten away with it for so long. Mm-hmm. So when you don't believe someone, when you don't make the space safe, when you don't foster your child that's an artist, I tell people all the time, even if you don't understand what your artistic child wants to do, just let them do it. My mother didn't always understand what I was doing, but she never said I couldn't do it. And whenever I told my mother that somebody was bothering me, she was there lickety split, the things that I felt free to tell her about. Because of all the other stuff we talked about, I did keep some secrets. But when we don't support these young people, 19, 20 years old, and they feel like they have everything on the line, and I don't want to, Ryan Houston said he agreed in his article, he said he agreed to go out because he wanted to show that he would be a good cast member or company member on tour, that he would be able to fit in. So even outside of getting the step right or making sure your musicality is on point, you felt like you had to go even further outside of rehearsal or outside of audition to make sure that this one person that's already shaky approves of you. Like you said, where Addison he was in that situation with this person that has been inappropriate in the meeting. Had he been cast in the company, he would have had to live with him. So in saying all of that, I want to make sure that we understand that when we are silent, mm-hmm. we give these people power. And again, they think they're above reproach, and they think that nothing is ever going to happen to them. So we can't keep feeding that.
And conversely to that point, after I say this part, I'm going to go on to the next question. But conversely to that, I think it's really also important that institutions need to understand that they are protected when you set up protocols where that predatory behavior is not part of it. Because as many people like to do, and I know that people watching this would be like, well, what about women who set up men? And what about people who play the line of it so they can get ahead? That happens too. But if an institution but I want to be clear, the numbers, and you can look this up on the CDC website, I believe, the numbers of people who falsely report versus the number of unreported rapes is like this. The disparity between the two.
Very big delta. Yeah.
It's a big delta. So although it happens, that is not the pervasive nature, but it does happen. I know friends who have been falsely accused of sexual harassment. And the only way they were able to get out of the situation is they have been a vocal proponent of sexual liberation and clarity, and they had always talked about the sexual safety and non-abusive environments. So the legacy of behavior and the transparency in which they lived made the investigation. They invited the investigation. And someone asked this question, moving right into that part. Wants us to talk briefly about what responsibility institutions have to investigate. Often they default to a lack of ability to do so based on the idea that cops have to be called first. And I'll just go here and I'll let Jamal talk on the legal side of it. Once again, I would say to institutions, when you focus on criminality, you miss the point. Mm-hmm. Criminality is important. If somebody has been assaulted, there should be a rape kit, there should be a report, they should tell somebody. I advocate for that. However, the pervasive nature of rape culture is it's not the guy in the corner with a trench coat that grabs you by your neck at knife point or gunpoint. It is somebody that has groomed you, knows you, and understands your vulnerabilities, and then takes advantage of the circumstances. Once it's reported, I believe it's the duty of an institution to investigate it fully and to have already had outside connections. Just like we had a connection tonight to a healthcare professional that was a psychologist, any institution can have and retain that same thing. Money cannot be why you don't have a psychologist, a psychiatrist, an HR department, a form training about sexual harassment. Any other institution in New York City every institution in New York that is legally working and employs people has to do sexual harassment training in New York City.
Yeah.
Is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
But I think institutions are responsible, particularly if you have children in your charge. First of all, as I said before, you're a mandatory reporter. So if somebody comes to you, you need to do all of the steps that are already written down in documents across this country to make sure that your staff. So let's and for 1 second, I'm going to be not victim-centered and say, okay, I want to protect my institution.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot protect it if you have somebody that's actually doing this in your midst. You also can protect your institution if someone is being falsely accused without you investigating. Because right now, we have allegations against Troy that some of them are true, some of them are said not to be true. All of this becomes a specter. Imagine had this not been hit to the New York Times and wasn't a big thing and he was still there. Now this is an open secret that everybody knows about. The next person could literally lie and say, I was raped in a closet by this person, and there's no standing to which to say, no, that didn't happen. There's no documentation. You make yourself more vulnerable to false accusations by not investigating it than you do. And Jamal, why don't you speak a little bit to the legality?
I was just about to say, you covered it actually. The Title IX portion of it is that there has been a massive overhaul in how institutions, especially college campuses, especially educational facilities, deal with sexual harassment charges, particularly with the students. And now that overhaul allows the usage of the preponderance, a preponderance of proof or evidence. That is actually enough for an investigation to happen. And there's a whole other show that could be done on the pros and cons of Title IX, and and whether or not sort of it has a way of re-traumatizing people who have already been victims of sexual abuse or assault. But the part of it that is absolutely true is that it allows a lot more space, a lot more latitude for, and then thus a smaller margin for sort of acceptability when it comes to, oh, we couldn't, or you absolutely can investigate, and it does not require Title IX does not require a cop or the police or a police report at all. You can absolutely investigate based on the preponderance of evidence that is given to you as a person who is, endowed with that kind of authority at the institution.
Well, gentlemen, it is 10 o'clock. We have come to the end of our time.
Already.
I just want to say that in steps moving forward, clarity, truth, vision, and speaking up is the only way forward. We can no longer be silent. If we are going to have true liberation for everyone, if we are going to throw off the chains of white supremacy, if Black lives and all of our Black lives truly do matter, then that means all of the lies that we are carrying as a source of liberation have to go too. And I think that in what I've said from the beginning, we have COVID-19, the revealer, because it's taken away all of our comforts.
Yes.
It's taken all of our ways that we were holding up the status quo. It gives us an opportunity to redefine and restructure the institutions that we say we love. If love is going to, it has to happen through truth. It cannot happen through deceit, fear, and non-disclosure. Jamal, Darell, I'll leave you with the last word tonight.
Yes.
Make the spaces that you find yourself in safe.
That's a good word. That's a good word.
Take us out of here tonight.
I agree. I would say that exactly what Darell said. And that part of the safety, I'm going to add to his sentence, part of the safety is making sure that you allow space for people to be able to tell their stories, for their narratives to be respected. You want to foster and encourage the telling of stories, especially in art, because that's what we're doing in art. We're telling stories, telling stories based on lives on lived experiences. And so we have to be able to tell the gamut of those experiences. Anytime you find yourself in a space of authority where you are prohibiting people from actually telling their personal stories, then we're actually stymieing the arts too. We're mashing down on the necks of individuals, and we are stymieing the art.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I just want to do a little housekeeping. We have our new Facebook page, Everywhere Sees the Beyond the Thread. Our new Instagram page will be coming this week. We will post this video. We will have resources for people to talk about the subjects that we discussed today. If you are in trouble, if you are afraid, please report, please speak out, please talk to someone, because there is help. People want to help you. We want to help you.
We do.
Absolutely.
So get in touch with us. DM us. There's not a person on the screen right now who will not move forward on your DM.
Absolutely.
So please reach out. Please ask people for help. Please understand that there are people in the world that want all of us to have a voice, and we are 3 of those people. This has been Beyond the Thread, Conversations in Context. Jamal.